Unit 2, Video 1. I can trace the events that led to the American Revolution, define boycotts, and then criticize/defend American actions and British actions. I'm going to do my best with these videos to show you both sides. I don't want to be completely pro-America. I don't want to be completely pro-British. Let's try to show both angles of this. I know exploring both sides eats up more time, but it's important to provide history and social studies analysis that is not slanted and biased and has an agenda. Let's just try to be good students about understanding both sides. As always, socialstudiesgames.net. That's where you can find all these PowerPoints, review games, assignments. You got it. So the biggest theme in this unit, at least for the beginning, up until the war, the British are going to do something and the Americans are going to respond and the British are going to respond to that. And it's just an example of cause and effect. British cause something, and then there's a result, and then the British respond to what the American colonists do, and then the American colonists respond to what the British do, and just spirals out of control until we have a war. So, for example, the British will pass a tax, and the Americans will boycott the tax, or the boycott the good. And you say, well, what is a boycott? So the definition on Google for a boycott is to withdraw from commercial or social relations with a country, organization, or person as a punishment or mainly a protest. Well, what's that mean? Let's say you want to punish the grocery store, or in this example, let's punish the candy apple shop. You don't like the candy apple shop because they are serving dangerous, unhealthy food, so you boycott it. You refuse to buy their goods until they change. If they don't change their habits and start producing safe goods, then they're going to go out of business. They're going to lose money every day till they go out of business, or eventually they realize, hey, we got to do better apples. Or maybe another example is you find out that the candy apple shop is employing illegal immigrants, or they're paying illegal immigrants very low wages, and you either don't agree with the illegal immigrants working, or maybe you disagree with paying unfair wages to illegal immigrants, and you say, we're not going to buy your apples until you change your behavior. And if enough people boycott, eventually the candy apple shop starts losing money, and they either have to go out of business or they change their habits. That is how a boycott happens. You can boycott countries. People boycott Israel because they don't like what is happening between Israel and Palestine. Some people boycott China because of what they're doing with the Uyghurs, or how they're treating the citizens in Hong Kong. You name it. A boycott is you refuse to participate in something or purchase something. Maybe the NBA won't hire women, so you stop watching NBA games. And if enough people stop watching NBA games, they start losing money, and they have to change the rules or laws. So boycotts are successful if enough people do them, and that's going to be one of the tools that the American colonists used during the American Revolution. And you can see the change there. So a law happened, taxes, and then, hey, maybe it's not a boycott. Maybe it's just straight violence. And the American colonists didn't just peacefully protest. I know this is, you're supposed to peaceful protest, or you're not supposed to peaceful protest. Well, I don't know if there's always a set rule of what you're supposed to do, but we can look and see what happened and what was successful and what worked. And so, yes, the American colonists boycotted, which was peaceful protest. They also used violence against tax collectors, tarring and feathering them, torturing them, killing them. Oh, you're going to take taxes from me? I'm just going to kill you, British. Another example is just to find ways around the law. So boycotts, violence, and then just illegal activity like smuggling, finding ways not to pay the goods. So there's always a cause and effect, and this back and forth, this cat and mouse game. So one of the first things before we get into taxes and the smuggling, one of the first problems that we have is that in the Midwest, now remember, coming back from the French and Indian War, the Americans and the British won. French pushed out, the Indians are pushed out. Well, the Americans are moving into the country, or from Europe or wherever, and they want to expand westward. There's all this land. They want to move. They want to start farms, produce more food, grow the country, create more job opportunities. People want to move west. People want to move to this open land. But there's American Indians in this land. Now, one of the difficulties that we run into in talking about this is we have this idea of American Indians and the Americans, and you've been taught this good guy versus bad guy nonsense. You got to stop looking at American history and the American present as good guys and bad guys. Often we're all the bad guys, and often the people that think they're the good guys sometimes are the bad guys. So separate from the good guy, bad guy nonsense, because then when we create this good guy and bad guy, like, the American Indians were treated terribly and poorly, and that's quite true in a lot of cases, but you are now telling the story of the American Indian as a victim. When we tell the story of all the poor American Indians, we've now created a history, a legacy of all their victims. They are a proud, strong people. Why do we want to treat them like victims and create this history narrative of victims? Why do white people or the American leaders or the American textbooks or the liberals want to paint this image of American Indians as inferior? That is not the history of American Indians, and they would not tell that story of themselves. The better way of looking at the interaction between American Indians and the colonists during this time would look, let's just separate from colonists. Let's pull the idea of Indians out, and let's just say Nation A and Nation B. And Nation A wants to move into this area where Nation B is. Obviously, there's going to be turmoil, there's going to be violence, there's going to be fighting over who owns that land. The same thing would happen on every continent and has happened and will happen in every continent in the world. When Nation A moves into the area of Nation B, they're going to try to settle who gets that land. So yes, it was a problem. Sure, there was probably racism involved. Sure, we could label it as genocide. But the easier way of looking at it, we've got people battling over land. Now, caught in the middle of this was the British. And after the French and Indian War, we'll remember that the British say, hey, here's the answer. Proclamation line of 1763. American colonists, you're on the eastern side. American Indians on the west. Leave each other alone. We don't want to keep getting in between you and settling all these disputes. And by settling disputes, we mean basically wars and violence. Well, the American colonists don't like that much. We fought the French and Indian War. We kicked the French out. We kicked the American Indians out. We want the land. We earned it. We deserve it, British. And now you're telling us, oh, sorry, you don't get anything. Well, the British have a little slightly different perspective. The British are saying the reason you don't get anything is because we're protecting you from those American Indians. Stop pretending that you're the ones out there fighting these battles. Sure, you're in the middle of it, but we're in the middle of it too. You're dragging us into it. And the king's saying, I got to spend all this money on soldiers to protect you. This is very expensive. That's why I created that line to separate you. I don't want to spend money constantly protecting you from the American Indians. I just fought a war to protect you from the American Indians. And the king thinks, look, I'm spending all this money on you. What you know what I ought to do? How about I just tax you? Guess what, folks? If the king has to spend all this money to protect you, then you're going to pay for it. And I'll use that money to pay for the soldiers. And from the American perspective, it's wait a second. I'm paying soldiers to keep me from moving west. I'm paying for them to keep me out of this land. What's the deal? We fought the war and to get the land. We're not allowed to have the land. Now we're paying you to make sure that we continue to not get the land. It's not fair. So there's a little bit of a whiny brat mentality to the American colonists, but there's also this king not really being that nice or fair. But this is really silly. We're looking at history from brats and fairness, but as silly as that sounds, a lot of the conflicts and issues that we have today are often brats and people not playing fair. So I beat the French and Indians for you. The very least you can do is pay your taxes. Well, there's a little bit more to that. We'll get to that in a second. It's not just taxes, but yes, definitely taxes are a big thing, especially with the people who wield power during this time. The people that have power and influence don't want to pay taxes. Very similar to today. They make the decisions and they are hurt the most by these high taxes. So the Sugar Act. Sugar Act is a word we'll use to describe a law, and this is a tax on sugar. So we get the sugar from the West Indies or from the Caribbean, and they move it into America. So $5 for sugar plus the tax. You've bought goods before. You understand what sales tax is. So we ship the goods in, and before they load it from the ship to the harbor where the guy who's selling the sugar, so let's say Walmart, the owner of Walmart shows up on the dock and says, all right, I want to buy my sugar. He buys the sugar, but he also has to pay the taxes right there at the dock. So for him to make up that money, he's now going to have to charge higher price for his sugar to make up for this tax. So basically, the tax is going to increase the price of goods on the consumer. But things get worse. Also during this time, the British are quartering, not a word we use very often, their soldiers in America. Quartering. Fourth Amendment now abolishes this, but soldiers were allowed to stay in your home. The soldiers got to stay somewhere. The soldiers are protecting the people. You're probably saying, what the... Well, let's look at this. So the story that you're going to get from most history teachers is, oh, it's terrible. They're staying in my home. Get out of my house. I can't believe the government would allow soldiers to forcibly sleep in my home. It is unheard of. It is terrible. And yeah, I can definitely understand why American citizens would be upset. The soldiers are sleeping in your home. But you have to understand what was going on during that time period. You have to separate from your views of today and life today. You have to look at what's going on from the lens of that moment. And in that moment, and we're mainly talking about New England and these cities, one of the reasons, maybe not the cities weren't necessarily protecting from Indians, but there were soldiers there protecting the American colonists from Indians. So the soldiers had to be in America. They had to stay somewhere. But the bigger reason why the British were in the cities was it was insane. Life during the before the American Revolution, during these colonial times, It was unruly. People were wild and crazy. And we'll talk about this in other videos. You think people are wild today? It is nothing compared to the lifestyle of the colonies and how crazy the streets were. So you needed British soldiers on the streets to protect people and keep it safe. Well, they had to stay somewhere. Now, that's the British perspective. The American perspective is find your own place to stay. There was also taxes on paper goods. This is the Stamp Act, and that might not sound like a big deal today, but remember, there isn't any digital technology. So imagine if the government today was going to tax all your digital technology, which they basically do. But if they taxed it to a ridiculous, like every time you log into YouTube, you had to pay a tax. Imagine that. Every video you watch, you're paying a tax. Maybe you kind of are, but you don't really notice it. But if you noticed that every time you get on YouTube, that you had to pay a tax, you'd be pretty upset. And again, the king's doing this because the king ran up a giant debt running the French Indian War. The king's running up a giant debt managing the colonies and around the world, and running up a debt protecting the Americans from Indians. So you can see, oh, look, it's another tax on all paper goods. Here's an interesting thing. So why is even a tax on my playing cards and dice? Well, why is that interesting? Most people just think, oh, that's a funny little anecdote, playing cards and dice. Well, that tells you a little bit about the mentality and the lifestyle and what is going on in the American colonies at this time. That they're mad that they're playing cards. They like to gamble, obviously. And what do you know of people who like to gamble? Are you thinking of angels? Are you thinking of saints? Or are you thinking of sinners? And this is not just something in passing. This is notable that it's in your textbooks, that it's in this image, that this was a significant thing, that the people were really upset about this. If the people were really upset about their gambling being limited, that gives you an idea of what life was like during the colonies. And then maybe you can understand, yeah, it was rowdy, it was unruly, and you needed British soldiers on the streets to keep these people under control. And you probably needed British soldiers in their homes. If you stop acting like crazy wild people, then maybe we could pull the soldiers out of your towns and get them out of your houses. But guess what? You people just want to party and gamble all day, so you need to be controlled. The British really have no problem paying taxes because they have representation in government. And when you have representation in government, you can pass laws. Why is that a big deal? Well, guess what? Say you're upset about the taxes. You have someone who represents you in the government, and that person that represents you can then change the law to lower your taxes. If you're not happy about a law, mainly taxes, the British people have a procedure, a process to change that. The American colonists did not. They had to pay taxes, but they did not have representation, so there's no way for them to change the laws. So every time the king hit them with a new law and a new law and a new law, there was nothing they could do because they had no representation. So we get the no taxation with representation without representation. This is one of your famous lines. John Otis, crazy man, nearly beaten to death, predicted he would be killed by a lightning strike, and guess what? He was killed by a lightning strike. That's the guy who came up with the no taxation without representation. John Otis, look it up. People want representation so they can control the laws, so the laws are fair. So it's not just them constantly getting bossed around by the king. So let's go back to the Sugar Act. The people are really upset about this. You're raising the price of sugar. Okay, well, big deal, right? It's just sugar. Chill out, people. Well, there's more to the story because sugar is a main ingredient in rum. Again, the story that you're not going to hear in most of your middle school social studies teachers or high school social studies teachers or even college is that one of the bigger underlining themes in the American Revolution is these people were crazy. The American colonists were not nice angels. A lot of this war starts from people who were rich and didn't want to pay taxes and people who were drunks and just wanted to party all the time. One of the things you probably don't want to do if you're the king and you've got rowdy people is to raise the price of alcohol. Probably not a good idea. So we're going to get boycotts, and they're going to boycott sugar. And if people stop buying sugar, then they're not selling sugar, and then they're also not getting a tax. That means less money for the king. Woo! But here's the problem. They got to get their alcohol. It's one thing to boycott a good, but can the people really survive without their blessed alcohol? No, they can't. But often what we have during a boycott or anything is people cheat. People always cheat throughout history and throughout all these stories. And even today, there's a lot of cheating. There's a lot of lying. Here's a perfect example. So when we think of the boycotts, those strong people, they didn't buy sugar. They did the right thing and they fought the power. No, they did the boycott and then they also cheated. So yes, they didn't buy the British goods of sugar. When they brought the sugar in, and that's when they did shakedown, or they would collect the taxes. So you would bring the sugar in from the Caribbean, and right there at the dock, that's where you had to pay taxes. Well, people are like, I'm not buying this. I'm not buying it. And so the British were not getting their tax dollars, but the people were still getting the sugar. Well, how are they still getting the sugar? Well, they were sneaking it in. Instead of buying the direct shipments of sugar every day, they were sneaking it in the dead of night and sneaking in the sugar so they could still get their alcohol. So they were still getting their alcohol and they weren't paying the taxes. So a big win for the Americans. Smuggling, illegal activity, cheating. Get my money. So one of the responses to the British always trying to get their money is that, again, boycott, smuggling, protests. There's violence too, and tarring and feathering, torturing and killing tax collectors. And you can see these artworks, and we call these people the Sons of Liberty. Are the Sons of Liberty patriots or domestic terrorists? And this applies to today. And unfortunately, a lot of people are going to take this idea of the Sons of Liberty, and you're going to use it to confirm or to be evidence for your own views. Like if you are Antifa, if you like Antifa, you're going to use the Sons of Liberty as an example. If you like ISIS, you're going to use the Sons of Liberty as, hey, they were doing the right thing. If you like the Proud Boys, you like whatever movement that you are into, you're going to say, no, they're patriots, they're doing the right thing. They're torturing and killing people. They are burning down stamp warehouses. It's kind of also terrorism too, isn't it? And I can't tell you which one it is, whether it's true or not. But one thing that I can tell you is before you use these guys to defend your views today, or you use them as an example to say, I am on the right side of history. Today I am right. Look at the American colonists. They called them terrorists, but look at where we are today. Yes, if you're going to use the Sons of Liberty as an example to defend your point and to make it look like you're on the right side of history, remember that the Sons of Liberty are killing people and burning down warehouses because they don't want to spend more on booze. If you're going to use them as an example for your righteous cause, saying, no, I'm on the right side of history. People said the same thing about the Sons of Liberty. You know what they also say about the Sons of Liberty? They murdered people because their booze cost a little too much. So how do you know today that your righteous fight is not going to be looked at in the future as, yeah, you were really complaining about that thing, but you were wrong. So eventually, after this back and forth, this is just step one, the king's going to say, fine, I get rid of the Stamp Act, I'll lower the sugar tax, but, and we will get to the but in the next video, socialstudiesgames.net. Check it out, and I get some more videos to you as soon as I can.